Our top focus on WION right now. Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed to retaliate against Ukraine's recent attacks on Russian territory. US President Donald Trump dialed the Russian leader on Wednesday, with the attacks dominating the agenda. The call came almost 72 hours after Kiev launched the unprecedented attack, destroying several nuclear-capable aircraft worth billions of dollars. Trump later posted on Truth Social about the call between himself and the Russian president, saying that the Russian leader told him that he would seek revenge for Ukraine's drone attacks on Moscow's bomber fleet. However, Trump made no mention of whether he had warned Putin of retaliating against Ukraine. Before this call, the US president has maintained silence over the recent developments related to the Russia-Ukraine war. Trump has been pushing for a truce between the two countries, with his efforts leading to peace talks in Istanbul. The Ukrainian attacks came just before the scheduled talks. Hours before his call with Trump, Putin appeared to rule out a ceasefire or any direct talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Putin has strongly reacted to the attacks on Russian border infrastructure, including a bridge strike that derailed a train and killed 7 people. The Russian president accused Ukraine of orchestrating these terror operations, specifically to thwart the negotiation procedure.
They are asking for a summit meeting. But how can such meetings be held in these conditions? What is there to talk about? How can we negotiate with those who rely on terror?
Kremlin has said that during the call, Trump told Putin that Washington was not informed in advance about the drone strikes. White House has been saying that Trump was not informed in advance of Ukraine's attack on Russia.
As for the strikes on Russian military airfields, this topic was also touched upon, and Donald Trump reaffirmed that the Americans had not been informed about this in advance. Naturally, the leaders agreed to continue contacts on the Ukrainian issue, including at the highest level, as well as at other levels and through other channels.
US in past has earlier threatened to walk away from mediation efforts if Russia and Ukraine do not commit to peace efforts. In yet another sign of another sign of US's position at this point of time, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth skipped a meeting on organizing military aid to Ukraine. This is the first time a Pentagon chief did not attend the meet since the US created the group to aid Ukraine 3 years ago. Hegseth, however, is attending a meeting of NATO defense ministers in Brussels, where he told NATO allies that they could not depend solely on Washington for defense, as he urged them to agree a spending deal of 5% of the GDP. According to Wall Street Journal, the Trump administration is also redirecting a key anti-drone technology earmarked for Ukraine to American forces, a move that reflects its waning commitment to Kiev's defense. The report says Pentagon notified Congress last week that special fuses for rockets that Ukraine uses to shoot down Russian drones are now being allocated to US Air Force units in West Asia. And well, for more on this, we are now being joined by Maximilian Hayes, Central Asia Fellow at FPRI. Welcome to WION, Mr. Hayes. Now, first up, after, of course, 2 days of lull, the White House has now reacted. While Trump did not say anything not to be done, Trump, however, did not warn his Russian counterpart not to strike back on Ukraine. He spoke on how the talks will not lead to immediate peace. At this point of time, is Trump perhaps taking a back seat? Because in his Truth Social post, Putin clearly said that Russia has to respond.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I think your analysis is accurate. That Trump is trying to take a back seat. Trump promised to be able to solve this conflict within the first 24 hours of coming into the White House. Obviously, that was the typical kind of braggadocio that we often hear from the U.S. president that hasn't been met by action. However, it's a real dichotomy between this position and the wider rhetoric that has come out of his administration and its supporters, which has been one of attempting to portray the idea of peace through strength, that the U.S., through prioritizing so-called America First, as Trump repeatedly insists on, will help bring about world peace and decrease conflict risk everywhere through the U.S.'s strength and its willingness to act. However, what we see right now is we see these negotiations where both sides aren't talking to each other, but are talking to the Trump administration to try to get Trump to come around to their position. Putin wants Trump to abandon further support for Ukraine, remove sanctions. The Ukrainians want the U.S. to be able to continue to provide that support, for Trump to agree with Republican senators who are pushing for enshrining those sanctions in law and increasing pressure on Putin. And what this is doing ultimately is, rather than creating a scenario of peace through strength, is creating more conflict through the Trump administration's weakness.
Right, Mr. Hez, I do want to talk about the fact that in his Truth Social post, Trump also said that U.S. was not aware of Ukraine's attack, and reports now suggest that U.S. has moved drone tech from Ukraine. Your assessment of that statement, wherein Trump clearly says that Washington wasn't aware of Ukraine's spider web operation against Russia. Was the U.S. intel really not working?
Well, firstly, what Donald Trump says online and what is actually true are often as far apart as the Russian and Ukrainian negotiating positions are right now. So I don't know if we should take his word as gospel on these matters. That being said, it is clear that Kiev is willing to escalate these strikes within Russia. We've seen European support for Kiev doing so, crucially as well. We do know that under the Biden administration, the first 2.5 years of this war, that there was a lot of action by the U.S. to try to have Ukraine refrain from certain attacks, and that intel cooperation and defense cooperation was very good. I don't think Kiev is looking to burn those relationships. There are some things that the Trump administration and the intelligence agencies in the U.S. might not have wanted to hear, and therefore were not told, for tactical planning reasons and for reasons of not upsetting Russia further. But I highly doubt that U.S. intelligence was completely unaware of either Ukraine's direct plans, but certainly not of the capability to carry out this kind of attack. And this is exactly where Trump's weakness is increasing these risks, because Kiev can use this same strategy that it just used to have such a devastating blow on Russia's air power, to expand its strikes within Russia, potentially to attack energy infrastructure and the assets that fund the Kremlin's war machine, rather than those that just carry out its devastating attacks.
Right. I also want to talk to you about how do you assess U.S.'s position at this point of time? Like you also mentioned, U.S. has moved drone tech away from Ukraine to West Asia. That's what reports claim. And also, the U.S. Secretary of Defense has skipped a meeting on organizing military aid to Ukraine. Keeping all this in mind, how do you foresee the United States of America's position on the Russia-Ukraine war as a mediator?
I think it's very clear that the Trump administration wants to step away from mediating this conflict, and it wants Europe in particular to pick up even more of the financial and military costs of supporting Ukraine. That will include Europe buying more U.S. arms, although that is something that has actually been ongoing since the full-scale invasion in 2022. Once again, Trump is looking for a rhetorical victory, something he can cast as success without actually having to risk anything. That being said, we've seen the Trump administration try to step away from the U.S.'s so-called global policeman role in a number of conflicts. We saw that in the conflict between India and Pakistan just a month ago, and in April, following the devastating terrorist attacks there, where the Trump administration initially said, we're going to refrain from getting involved in this, but then within a few days, as conflict was escalating and there were dogfights and drone strikes between the air forces of Pakistan and India, that the Trump administration did then intervene and look to try to mediate some kind of a ceasefire, which has been holding for now. So I don't think that Trump administration, as much as it may want to walk away from this conflict, will be able to do so, one, for reasons of global stability, and two, for reasons of Trump's ego and him trying to protect himself from further embarrassment.
Right. Just to add to that, India has clearly said that it wasn't the Trump's interference or mediation that helped to broker the ceasefire. But coming back to the Russia-Ukraine war, my last question to you. Russia has said that it will be a blow for a blow. What kind of retribution do you expect from Russia?
It's important to remember that the 1st of June, the date on which these Ukrainian drone strikes came against Russian Air Force, also saw Russia launch a record number of missiles and drones, projectiles overnight at Ukraine, over 420. Before the beginning of 2025, incidents involving more than 100 such attacks in one night were fairly irregular. We also are aware that there's an ongoing Russian offensive in the far north of Ukraine into Sumy Oblast, Ukraine's northernmost region on the border with Kursk and Belgorod in Russia. It's very clear that Putin is planning for an intense summer offensive there. And between these two rounds of negotiations in Istanbul in the middle of May and then on the 2nd of this month, we saw Putin increase his demands to specifically include not only that Ukraine essentially get rid of its government, agree to his full annexation desires and territory he's never entirely controlled, but now also to this buffer zone. So Putin will be going for those full-out demands.
Right, Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here on WION World is One with your insights.
Thank you for having me.